I'm Avery Whitaker, 34 years old, a fourth-grade teacher in Maple Ridge, Oregon. 4 days before my wedding, I learned that my own mother had gone behind my back, used my email to cancel my florist, my bakery, my rentals, and my venue, then quietly told my fiancé, my future in-laws, and half our town that I was too fragile to get married. By the morning of my wedding, nearly 200 guests had been sent toward an empty barn. My reputation was falling apart in public, and the woman who was supposed to love me most believed she had already won. What she did not know was that my best friend had seen this coming before I ever did, and what my mother walked into that day did not destroy me. It exposed the truth about her. My wedding day was supposed to be June 14th, 2026. I woke up at 6 that morning in the little rental house I had been living in since I started teaching back in 2017. The kitchen window faced the street, and the early summer light had just begun to warm the pavement. My phone was buzzing on the nightstand. At first, I smiled. I assumed it was friends texting congratulations or bridesmaids asking about hair and makeup schedules. I picked up the phone and opened the first email instead. It was from Blue Meadow Florals. Laura Kim owned the shop. We had been working together for months planning the flowers for the ceremony. She had a calm voice and a way of sketching arrangements that made everything feel possible. The email was short. She wrote that they had received my cancellation request the night before and wanted to confirm before processing the paperwork. For a moment, I thought I had read it wrong. I sat up in bed and opened the message again. My name was signed at the bottom of the cancellation email she attached. My full name. My usual email signature. I felt a cold ripple move through my chest. I dialed the shop immediately. Laura answered on the second ring. Avery? Hi, Laura. I think there's been some kind of mistake. What do you mean? I never canceled anything. There was a pause on the other end. Avery, the message said it came from your address. I didn't send it. Another pause. The message said the bride was dealing with personal issues and needed to cancel the wedding services. I swung my legs off the bed and opened my laptop on the kitchen table. My inbox loaded slowly. When the screen refreshed, my stomach dropped. There were 3 outgoing emails sent late the night before, all of them canceling wedding vendors, all of them signed with my name. I stared at the screen long enough that Laura spoke again. Avery, I'm here. You're sure this wasn't you? I promise you it wasn't. She exhaled softly. I'm going to hold the order for now, but if the cancellation stands, the contract terms still apply. I understand. After we hung up, I pulled up the number for Cedar Hill Barn. That was our venue, an old wooden barn that had been renovated into a wedding space just outside town. There was a field behind it, and strings of lights hanging from the beams inside. I had fallen in love with it the first time I saw it. The manager answered. Cedar Hill Barn? This is Avery Whitaker. I think there might be a problem with our reservation. Avery, we received your cancellation last night. My heart thumped against my ribs. I didn't cancel anything. You also called to confirm the cancellation. I did not. The man hesitated. The caller identified herself as you. I leaned against the counter. So the venue is booked today? No, ma'am. The contract was terminated. The deposit is non-refundable. I closed my eyes for a second. Almost 200 guests were expecting to arrive there in just a few hours. After I hung up, I stood in the quiet kitchen and listened to the refrigerator humming. The whole house suddenly felt too still. Then I called Ryan. Ryan Cole was 36 and the calmest person I knew. He owned a woodworking shop called Cole Timberworks on the edge of town. Before opening it in 2022, he had spent years working construction jobs in Portland. He answered on the third ring. Morning. Ryan, something is wrong. What happened? The venue thinks I canceled the wedding. There was a brief silence. You're serious? Yes. He let out a slow breath. I just got a strange call. From who? Your mom. I pressed my hand to the counter. What did she say? She said you might not be feeling well and that the wedding could be postponed. She told you that? Yeah. What exactly did she say? Ryan hesitated. She said you've been under a lot of emotional pressure. I walked to the window and looked out at the quiet street. Maple Ridge was the kind of town where people waved when they passed your driveway and asked about your family at the grocery store. Rumors traveled fast here, faster than the truth. Ryan spoke again. Avery? I'm thinking. You think your mom had something to do with this? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at my laptop screen. 3 emails. 3 cancellations, all signed with my name. I don't know, but deep down, I already did. My father had died in the spring of 2018. Daniel Whitaker spent most of his life fixing farm equipment around Maple Ridge. When he passed away from a heart attack, the house felt hollow for months afterward. After the funeral, my mother said the same sentence again and again. It's just the two of us now. At first, her attention felt like comfort. She called every day to check on me. She asked what I ate for dinner, whether I was sleeping enough, whether teaching was becoming too stressful. But over time, that attention slowly changed. When I began teaching at Maple Ridge Elementary in 2017, she told neighbors I worked too hard and worried too much. When Ryan and I started dating in 2020, she told a few friends that he didn't really understand me the way she did. Ryan never tried to argue with her. That wasn't his style. He preferred quiet solutions: fix the hinge, sand the rough edge, build something sturdy enough to last. He proposed in the fall of 2024 on a trail just outside town. My mother cried when she heard the news. She hugged me and said she only wanted me to be happy. A few weeks later, she began asking questions about the wedding. Who were the vendors? Who handled the guest list? How much everything cost? At the time, I thought she just wanted to help. We booked Cedar Hill Barn early in 2025. I loved how simple it felt. Weathered wood, open fields, warm lights strung across the ceiling beams. My mother frowned the first time she saw it. It's a little plain. After that, she began offering suggestions: different flowers, more formal decorations, additional guests from the church community. Eventually, she started calling vendors herself. Avery is busy with school. That was what she told them. Most of them assumed she was just a helpful mother. I never noticed the moment when the wedding planning stopped being mine. Now I sat at my kitchen table, staring at emails I never sent. Outside, the morning sun climbed higher over Maple Ridge, and for the first time, it occurred to me that the person who might have erased my wedding day from existence was the same person who had promised all her life to protect me: my mother. I kept staring at the screen long after the coffee in my mug went cold. It was not just the shock of that morning. It was the sickening feeling that once I let myself consider my mother, 100 smaller moments from the past year began sliding into place. They had never felt dangerous at the time. They had felt annoying, intrusive, a little embarrassing maybe, the kind of things you rolled your eyes at and pushed through because weddings made people weird and grief made people clingy and small. Towns made everything louder than it should be. But sitting there in my kitchen with those fake cancellations in my outbox, I could finally see how the months before my wedding had shifted under my feet without me noticing. My mother started showing up in the planning almost as soon as Ryan and I booked Cedar Hill Barn in early 2025. At first, it was practical. I was teaching full-time. 4th grade in May was chaos, and 4th grade in September was worse. She offered to make a few calls. "You have enough on your plate," she said, like a kindness, and for a while it was easier to let her. When Laura from Blue Meadow Florals needed a quick answer about centerpiece sizes, my mother would call and tell her I was still deciding. When the caterer wanted a final head count for the tasting, my mother would volunteer to coordinate. When the rental company asked about table linens, she somehow already had opinions. I remember the first time something changed without me approving it. Ryan and I had chosen a simple dinner menu: roast chicken, seasonal vegetables, dinner rolls, berry cobbler for dessert. Nothing flashy, just good food that felt warm and familiar. A week later, the updated invoice showed plated salmon and a lemon tart I had never asked for. I called my mother from the school parking lot after dismissal. Why did the menu change? It didn't change that much. It changed completely. Avery, honey, the original choices were a little plain. I leaned against my car with my bag slipping off one shoulder. They were our choices, and now they're better choices. That became her pattern. Every time I pushed back, she answered as if I were being emotional and she were being reasonable. Flowers were next. I wanted soft summer colors: pale pink peonies, white garden roses, a little greenery, something loose and unfussy. Then, one afternoon, Laura emailed me a revised floral mock-up with tall, formal arrangements and dark burgundy accents. I called the shop. "Laura, this isn't what I picked." There was a beat of silence. "Your mother said you wanted something more elegant." I looked down at the cracked blacktop of the school lot. "I didn't say that." Laura sounded confused. "I'm sorry, she said she was speaking for you." It kept happening in little ways that were easy to dismiss one at a time. The guest list grew. My mother added names from church, women from the community fundraiser committee, couples I had not seen since high school graduation. She said these were people who had supported our family after my father died. You can't leave them out. It's not about leaving them out. It looks ungrateful if you do. Grateful, ungrateful. Those words had shaped more of my life than I liked to admit. Maple Ridge had its own rules about gratitude. People brought casseroles when someone died, sat in folding chairs at school concerts, remembered the anniversary of your father's passing before you did. It was kind, and it was suffocating. You were always being watched, in a gentle way that still felt like being watched. So when the first strange question came from a parent at school, I did not know what to do with it. It was a Thursday afternoon in late April. I was standing outside my classroom while kids waited for pickup. Mrs. Donnelly, whose son was in my math group, stopped beside me and lowered her voice. "Are you doing okay, sweetheart?" I smiled automatically. "Of course." She gave me a sympathetic look that made my stomach tighten. "I only asked because I heard wedding planning's been hard on you." I laughed a little too quickly. "It's busy, but I'm fine." She nodded, but it was the kind of nod people give when they do not believe you. A week later, Principal Karen Alvarez asked if I had a minute. Her office smelled faintly like printer paper and peppermint tea. She closed the door and folded her hands on the desk. "I don't want to overstep." I sat down across from her. "Okay." "A couple of parents mentioned concerns that you might be under more stress than usual." I stared at her. "Concerns from who?" "I'm not naming anyone. I'm just checking in." "I'm fine." Karen's expression stayed careful. "I'm glad to hear that." In Maple Ridge, teachers were not just employees. We were public people. Parents saw us at the grocery store, in church, at the gas station, at the summer parade downtown. If someone started questioning whether you were stable or overwhelmed, it did not stay private for long. That night, I told Ryan while he was wiping sawdust off his hands at the sink. He looked up. "That's not normal." "I know. Did your mom say anything to anybody?" "I don't know." But I did know. At least part of me did. Ryan's mother, Susan Cole, lived in a blue house 2 blocks over from ours. She owned a used bookstore off Main Street and had a quiet, grounded way about her that made most people feel calmer the longer they stood near her. A few days after my conversation with Karen, Ryan came home from visiting her and set his keys down harder than usual. My cousin asked if you were having doubts. I turned from the stove. What? He shrugged, but his jaw was tight. Just out of nowhere, asked if you were really up for all this. I shut off the burner. Why would he ask that? Ryan pulled out a chair and sat down. I asked Mom if anybody had been talking. I waited. He said your mom called her a few weeks ago. I felt my face go still. What did she say? That you've been fragile lately, that maybe the wedding was moving too fast. And your mom believed her? Not exactly. He rubbed one hand over the back of his neck. But it got in her head. That hurt more than I expected, not because Susan doubted me for a minute, but because my mother had reached into Ryan's family and touched something that did not belong to her. Around that same time, Megan started noticing things I kept trying not to see. Megan Brooks had been my best friend since 9th grade. She had spent 5 years in Portland working event planning before moving back to Maple Ridge to be closer to her parents. She knew contracts, vendors, timelines, budgets. More than that, she knew people. She knew when something smelled wrong. One evening, she came over with takeout and sat at my kitchen table while I sorted seating chart cards. I told her the caterer had changed the dessert course again. She looked up. You changed it. No? Then who did? I set down the stack in my hand. I don't know, maybe there was confusion. Megan held my gaze for a second. Who talks to them the most? The answer came out before I could soften it. My mother. Megan did not say anything dramatic. She just nodded once and reached for her soda. From that point on, she started asking to be copied on planning emails. She said it was just to help keep things organized. I let her because it sounded practical and because some part of me was tired of feeling like the only person in the room who did not understand what was happening. Then my mother showed up at school. It was just afternoon. I was walking back from the teacher's lounge when the front office secretary waved me over. My mother stood near the counter in a pale blue cardigan, holding her purse with both hands like she belonged there. I needed to check on you. I stopped a few feet away. Mum, I'm working. She smiled too brightly. I know, I just worry you've been pushing yourself too hard. Her voice was louder than it needed to be. 2 teachers passing in the hallways slowed down without meaning to. I'm fine. She tilted her head. You don't always tell the truth when you're overwhelmed. The blood rushed hot to my face. Please don't do this here. For the first time, something like satisfaction flickered across her expression before it vanished. That night, Ryan sat on the edge of our couch while I stood by the window, still in my work clothes, arms folded tight. Do you think she's trying to control the wedding? I looked out at the dark street. The answer should have been simple, but it was not. Not yet. If I admitted that, then I had to admit I had been letting it happen for months. I did not answer him. Megan did later. She was rinsing a wine glass in my sink when she glanced over her shoulder and said it in the calmest voice imaginable. Your mom is not helping you plan a wedding. She set the glass in the drying rack. She's trying to control your life. I barely slept after Megan said it out loud. It was the Tuesday before our Saturday wedding. Not because her words shocked me, but because once they were spoken, I could not push them back into the room and pretend I had never heard them. The next morning, I drove to school with a knot in my stomach and kept checking my phone at red lights, half expecting another email, another cancellation, another quiet little piece of my wedding disappearing without my permission. The first message came during recess. I was standing near the blacktop while 2 boys argued over whose turn it was with a kickball when my phone buzzed in my cardigan pocket. I glanced down and saw an email from the bakery. The subject line read, "Confirmation of cancellation." For a second, the words did not register. Then everything inside me went cold. I waited until my class went in with the lunch aid before I opened it. The bakery manager wrote that they were sorry to hear the wedding would no longer be moving forward and wanted to confirm that the cancellation request sent that morning was accurate. I called from the empty hallway outside my classroom. There has to be some mistake. Avery, we received the email directly from your account. I did not send it. There was a pause. The message included your contract number and a note that all wedding services should be terminated immediately. I pressed one hand against the cinder block wall. Please don't cancel anything else yet. We'll hold for the day, but we do need clarification soon. By the time I got home that afternoon, I had 2 more messages, one from the rental company, one from the woman handling the string quartet for the ceremony. Same language, same false politeness, same assumption that I was the one tearing my own wedding apart. I spread printed copies of the emails across my kitchen table until they nearly covered the whole surface. Ryan stood on the other side of it with both hands braced against the wood. How many is that? 5. He looked down at the pages. They all came in while you were at school. I did not answer because I had already noticed the same thing. Megan came over after dinner, carrying her laptop and a yellow legal pad. She sat down, pulled the emails toward herself, and started reading one by one. She did not waste time trying to comfort me first. That was one of the reasons I trusted her. After a few minutes, she tapped one of the printouts with her pen. Look at the timestamps. I leaned closer. The emails had gone out at 10:14, 11:52, and 1:03, times when I had been teaching math, monitoring lunch, or walking a line of 4th graders back from art. I couldn't have sent any of these. I know. She opened another email and pointed again. The sign-off is copied from your old messages. Same wording, same punctuation. My mouth went dry. My mother has seen plenty of my emails. Megan did not nod right away. She just kept reading. A few minutes later, she looked up. Did you ever save your wedding planning password somewhere she could have found it? I thought about that and hated myself for the answer. Maybe once. I wrote it in a notebook when all the vendor logins started piling up. Ryan swore under his breath and turned away toward the sink. That same week, my mother posted on Facebook. She did not use my name, which somehow made it worse. The message was written in the vague, wounded tone people use when they want everyone to ask what is wrong. Sometimes loving your child means making difficult decisions when they are too overwhelmed to make them for themselves. I stared at the post on my phone while standing in line at the pharmacy. 3 women from town had already reacted with heart emojis. One had commented that a mother always knows. By the next morning, Karen Alvarez asked to see me again. I sat in the same chair across from her desk while she folded her hands and chose her words too carefully. A parent called this morning. I waited. They asked whether you were having some kind of personal crisis. The shame hit me so hard it almost felt physical. I am not. I didn't think you were. Then why am I here? Karen's expression softened. Because I want you to hear it from me before it gets louder. I swallowed against the tightness in my throat. Who is saying this stuff? She did not answer, and she didn't have to. That evening, I sat on the living room floor with my back against the couch and a stack of cancellations in my lap. Ryan sat beside me, one knee drawn up, silent in the way he got when he was trying not to make things worse. The house was dim except for the lamp by the bookshelf. Outside, a truck rolled past, and then the street went quiet again. At 9:45, Megan knocked once and came in carrying 2 folders. She took one look at my face and got straight to it. We have 2 choices. Ryan lifted his head. Okay. We can call this off, eat the losses, and spend the next 6 months cleaning up the story your mother is building. The words landed heavy in the room. Or, Megan set the folders on the coffee table. Or we rebuild fast and smart. I laughed once, sharp and humorless. In 4 days? In less than that. That's impossible. No, it's expensive, exhausting, and very inconvenient. That's different. Ryan looked from her to me. What would you need? Megan answered immediately. 48 hours. I stared at her. For what? To make calls, to see what can be saved, to figure out who still works for you and who's already working for her. I tightened my grip on the papers in my lap. And if it doesn't work, then at least you'll know you didn't surrender without trying. The room went still. Then Megan leaned forward and pointed at me with the cap of her pen. You do not post online. I nodded once. You do not call your mother. I nodded again. And you do not tell anyone anything unless it goes through me or Ryan first. Ryan glanced at her, then back at me. Avery? I looked at him. Let her try. So I did. The next 2 days felt unreal. Megan was everywhere and nowhere at once. She left before sunrise, returned after dark, and answered only half my texts. When she did reply, the messages were short. Working on it. Need more time. Don't panic yet. Michael Whitaker, my father's younger brother, stopped by one afternoon and spoke quietly with Ryan on the porch. I could not hear the conversation through the screen door, but I saw the look on his face when he glanced toward me. Sadness first, then something firmer. Ryan spent even longer hours at Coal Timber Works. He came home dusty, tired, and distracted. I told myself he was handling practical things I did not have the energy to face. Part of me worried he was retreating into work, because work was simpler than me. By the second night, I was so worn down I stopped checking my phone every 5 minutes. I just sat at the kitchen table and listened to the clock over the stove tick through the dark. A little after 9, Megan came through the back door without knocking. Her cheeks were flushed from the evening air. She dropped a thick folder onto the table, pulled out the chair across from me, and finally smiled for the first time in 2 days. Your wedding is not canceled. I stared at her, not trusting myself to speak. She slid the folder toward me. It's just happening somewhere else. Megan opened the folder and spread everything across my kitchen table like she was laying out pieces of a map. There were printed contracts, a handwritten timeline, a fresh guest list marked with circles and arrows, and a sheet with one name underlined twice. Elmwood Garden. I looked up at her. What is that? A venue. In 4 days? In 2 now. Ryan stepped closer to the table, still in his work boots, sawdust clinging to the cuff of his jeans. You're serious? I called Kyle Benton first thing yesterday morning. Megan slid one of the pages toward us. He had a Saturday opening because another event had fallen through. It's smaller than Cedar Hill Barn, but it's private, it's beautiful, and most important, it's available. I stared at the paper without really seeing it. You found a whole new venue? I found one that can happen. Ryan picked up the guest sheet. What about vendors? Some are gone. She said it plainly without trying to soften it. But not all of them. Laura at Blue Meadow is still in. The bakery can do a smaller cake if we confirm by tomorrow morning. Rentals are trickier, but we can strip the setup down and make it feel intentional instead of incomplete. I looked at her. How? Megan glanced at Ryan. That part depends on him. Ryan's eyes narrowed slightly. On me, how? She pointed toward him with her pen. You've been hiding in your shop for a week. Tell her. He hesitated just long enough for me to notice. Then he looked at me. I wasn't hiding. I folded my arms. Then what were you doing? He rubbed the back of his neck once and let out a breath. Building chairs. For a second, I had heard him wrong. What? He gave a small shrug like it was too late to be embarrassed now. I didn't like the rental chairs. I figured I'd make a few. Then a few turned into more. Megan leaned back in her chair. He has enough for the ceremony. I looked at Ryan, really looked at him, and saw his tiredness in his face differently. Not distance, not retreat, effort. You were building our wedding." His mouth twitched. Parts of it. Something in my chest loosened so suddenly it almost hurt. Megan kept moving. She had no patience for sentiment once there was work to do. "Tomorrow morning, I send the venue change to the guests I trust not to leak it. Michael will redirect anybody who still ends up at Cedar Hill. Susan can help call the older relatives who ignore text messages. We keep this tight. We keep it quiet. And Avery." I looked at her. "Your mother gets nothing." I nodded. The next day moved so fast I barely had time to panic. Megan sat at my table with coffee, her phone, and that legal pad from 2 nights before. She called people in batches, changing her tone depending on who picked up. Warm with older relatives, brisk with vendors, direct with friends. I heard her say the same sentence so many times it started to sound like part of a script. "The ceremony has been moved. It's still on. New location. Please do not share it widely." By afternoon, my phone had shifted from sympathy and confusion to startled support. "We'll be there. Thanks for letting us know. Do you need anything?" A few guests still went to Cedar Hill that Saturday, just like Megan said some would. Michael Whitaker and 2 of Ryan's friends stood out near the gravel lot in pressed shirts and pointed cars back toward Elmwood Garden before questions had time to gather. I did not see any of that happen. I only heard about it later. What I remember is standing in a small white room at the back of Elmwood Garden with my dress half-zipped and my hands so cold I could barely hold still. The venue was nothing like Cedar Hill Barn. It was smaller and greener and more intimate, with climbing roses along a fence and lantern hooks hanging from low tree branches. Through the window, I could see the tops of the chairs Ryan had made, lined up in straight rows across the lawn. Megan stood behind me, fastening the last tiny buttons. "Breathe." I am breathing. Barely. She stepped around in front of me and smoothed the front of my dress. Then she softened. "You look like yourself." That mattered more than pretty, more than elegant, more than any of the words my mother had used while trying to turn my wedding into something polished and public and no longer mine. A knock sounded at the door. Michael did not come in. He only opened it enough to lean against the frame for 1 second, already dressed, tie slightly crooked. "You good?" I almost laughed. "No." He smiled. "Same." His eyes moved over me, and whatever he was about to say seemed to catch in his throat. Finally, he nodded once. "See you out there." When the door closed, Megan looked at me with one eyebrow raised. He's trying very hard to not lose it before the ceremony. That makes 2 of us. Outside, guests were taking their seats. I could hear the soft scrape of chair legs on stone and the low murmur that happens before something begins. Then, at Cedar Hill Barn, my mother arrived. I did not know the details in real time, but enough people told me later that I can see it clearly now. Her car pulling into the lot, her stepping out in a pressed dress, expecting confusion, maybe tears, maybe the kind of scene she could step into and control. Instead, she found an empty venue. No caterer, no florist, no guests gathering with worried faces, just locked doors, a silent barn, and the heat rising off the gravel. At first, she thought people were late. Then she started calling. One church friend, no answer. Another, straight to voicemail. Then Susan, then me, then Ryan. No one picked up. By the time somebody finally told her the wedding had been moved, I was standing at the edge of the lawn at Elmwood Garden with Michael beside me and Megan fixing one last strand of hair near my temple. "You ready?" I looked out toward the chairs Ryan had built with his own hands, toward Susan in the front row, toward Laura from Blue Meadow adjusting the ribbon on a floral arrangement she had somehow made look effortless, toward Ryan waiting under the arch, shoulders squared, eyes fixed on the path where I would appear. And somewhere beyond all of it, down the road and around the bend, my mother was driving toward us. I am now. The music began, soft and steady. Michael offered me his arm. I took it. Halfway down the aisle, I stopped seeing the crowd as individuals and started seeing them as proof that people had come, that the day still existed, that I was not standing in the wreckage my mother had tried to leave me in. I reached Ryan. Michael squeezed my hand once before stepping back. The officiant started speaking, but I barely heard him. All I could hear was my own pulse and Ryan's breathing and the distant crunch of gravel from somewhere near the gate. My mother had arrived. I did not turn around, but a small shift moved through the guests near the back, heads angled slightly, bodies tensed and then settled. Later, someone told me Kyle Benton stepped forward before she reached the lawn, that he kept his voice calm, that he asked for her name, that he checked the list even though he already knew, and that when he looked up, he said the one thing my mother had spent my whole life making impossible. "You're not on it." I stood under the arch at Elmwood Garden with Ryan's hands in mine and the summer air pressing warm against my skin, while just beyond the entrance, my mother waited outside a day she could no longer reach. The first quiet moment I remember came 3 days after the wedding. I was back in my classroom before 7 in the morning, taping vocabulary cards to the board while the building was still mostly dark. Summer break was close enough that the halls had started to feel looser, lighter, but there were still a few days left on the calendar, a few more lunches to supervise, a few more end-of-year forms to sign. For the first time in weeks, my hands were steady. That did not mean everything was fixed. It only meant the crisis had finally moved out of my body enough for me to stand still and notice the silence it left behind. By then, Maple Ridge already knew something had happened. Photos from Elmwood Garden had made their way onto Facebook by Sunday morning. Ryan standing under the arch, the rows of handmade chairs, the flowers from Blue Meadow. Me laughing with my head tipped back like I had forgotten anyone was watching. And in every photo, there was one absence people noticed immediately. My mother was nowhere in them. No one asked me directly at first. In a town like ours, curiosity often arrived disguised as politeness. But I could feel it in the pause before people spoke, in the way conversations shifted when I walked into Miller's grocery, in the careful tone Karen Alvarez used when she stopped by my classroom after lunch. She leaned against the doorframe and looked around at the paper projects hanging from the ceiling. "You okay?" I set down a stack of graded spelling tests. "I think so." She gave me a small smile. "That's good." Then she hesitated. "There's been some talk." I let out a breath that was almost a laugh. I assumed there would be. Karen folded her arms loosely. "For what it's worth, people are starting to piece together that you were not the one causing the chaos. That mattered more than I expected it to." Not because I needed Maple Ridge to approve of me. At least, that is what I told myself. But when you've spent your whole life in a place where people watched you grow up, being quietly misjudged by all of them at once can feel like disappearing in public. By the end of that week, Laura from Blue Meadow had told 2 people that the cancellation email came from my account but did not sound like me. The bakery manager had said something similar to someone else. Susan heard from a church friend that my mother arrived at Cedar Hill expecting to find a wedding that no longer existed. The story kept moving through town, but it was changing shape now. It was no longer poor Linda trying to save her overwhelmed daughter. It was something messier and uglier and closer to the truth. One evening, Ryan and I sat at our kitchen table, eating reheated pasta while the windows were open to the early summer air. He set his fork down. "We should at least talk to someone." I knew what he meant. About what she did? About the cancellations, the contracts, the emails. I stared at the condensation sliding down my water glass. "You want to sue my mother?" "No." He shook his head. I want to know what your options are." That felt fair. So the next afternoon, we met Mark Henderson in his office above the hardware store. Mark had known Ryan since high school. He did civil work mostly: contracts, property disputes, small business matters. He listened without interrupting while Ryan laid out the timeline, and I slid copies of the emails across his desk. When he finished reading, he looked at me carefully. "If someone impersonated you to cancel signed agreements, that creates potential exposure." I hated how clinical that sounded. Exposure. As if my wedding had been a cracked pipe or faulty insulation. Mark kept his tone even. "I'm not telling you what to do. I'm saying you would not be unreasonable to consider legal action." Ryan looked at me. I looked down at my own hands in my lap. The truth was, I did think about it. For one full night, maybe two. I imagined deposit refunds, formal letters, a court date, my mother being forced to answer questions in front of people who were not afraid of her. But every version ended with the same feeling. I wanted distance more than damages. More of her, more explaining, more reacting, more hours of my life arranged around what she had done. By Sunday afternoon, I knew my answer. No. Ryan stood at the sink rinsing coffee mugs. No to what? No lawsuit. He dried his hands and turned around. "You sure?" I nodded. "I don't want the rest of our first year of marriage built around a war with my mother." He leaned back against the counter. "Then what do you want?" That answer came faster. A boundary. A week after the wedding, I sat alone at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and wrote my mother a letter. The first version was too angry. The second one sounded like I was still trying to earn her understanding. I tore both pages out and started over. The final version was shorter. I told her that she no longer had permission to make decisions on my behalf. I told her she could not contact my workplace, my vendors, or my husband about me again. I told her that if she wanted any place in my life moving forward, it would have to be based on honesty and respect, not guilt, pressure, or control. I did not ask for an apology. I did not explain my feelings in paragraphs the way I used to. I just drew the line. Michael dropped the envelope in her mailbox for me that evening on his way home. For a while, that was the end of it. Summer moved in fully. School let out. Ryan stayed busy at Cold Timber Works, especially after 2 wedding guests asked if he would build dining tables for them after seeing the chairs at Elmwood Garden. Susan stopped by one Saturday with a box of books she thought I would like and did not mention my mother once. Megan came over with iced coffee and acted like saving a wedding in 48 hours was merely inconvenient, not heroic. Life did not become perfect. It became quieter. There is a difference. About a year later, in June of 2027, I came home from school and found an envelope tucked inside the screen door. My name was written across the front in my mother's handwriting. I stood in the kitchen for a full minute before opening it. Inside was a short note. No excuses, no sermon, no performance. Just a few lines telling me she was sorry, that she had been wrong, that she had confused love with control for longer than she wanted to admit. I read it twice and set it down beside the fruit bowl. That evening, Ryan came in from the shop carrying a paper bag from the farm stand. There was a bunch of wildflowers sticking out of the top. He set them on the table between us without asking any questions. I took one stem from the bunch and laid it beside my mother's letter. I did not know whether she had changed. I still don't. But I knew something else with absolute certainty. For the first time in my life, my story no longer depended on whether she ever did. If you have ever had to set a boundary with someone in your own family, I would really love to know what that looked like for you.